Hi, I'm Jonathan. You might know me from such videos as many of the others in the innerVIVID series. We've made a lot. Maybe you've been travelling through them all. Maybe you've started here. Either is okay. Today, every day, we're coming to you from the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people, lands never ceded. We've been chatting in these latest vids about the concept of a higher power, if there is one, and if there is, what is that HP, as I like to call them, like? We've thought about how people come to believing this kind of stuff and whether it's an excuse for bad behaviour. Spoiler, it might be, but it might not be too. Ultimately though, what difference does it make? If you decide to go with a particular idea, or at least start testing the waters for how that would feel, how would it change anything? That's a long way of saying this pithy question.
How does it make a difference to believe in a higher power?
My husband doesn't share my faith. We kick this around a lot. The belief in a higher power or a divine, or for me, God, that does make a difference because it informs what I do next. It informs who I am. And no matter what happens, I actually feel as though I am within this incredibly creative and loving and good being. I'm held, and there is purpose and value, and I'm seen in all of it. If for me my life was only about me, I'm only going to do what's going to extend my comfort for, maybe the next 30 years, if I'm lucky, 40 years. But that doesn't do anything for my children. It doesn't do anything for the people next door. It certainly doesn't do anything for the world. But if I do believe there is something more than me and bigger than my family, if I actually believe that there is something that is calling me to fairness and goodness and justice, then I behave differently. And I find people who are like me, who believe the same thing. And then little by little, good, justice, belonging, community, acceptance, care, tenderness, that forms and comes together in spite of the de-evolution we see around us. And that's where my hope is, my hope for the world, my hope for my children.
Well, I think for me the most important thing is helping me to remember that it's not all about me. I am not the only person on this planet, nor do we live in a billion different isolated contexts. We all kind of live together. We all have to work together to create a better world, in whatever sense you feel that that's important. But we can only do that by realising that the sum of the parts is going to be more important than all the individuals added together.
I hear people who have thought about their spirituality saying this a lot. We're in this together. We're all connected. As an introvert, that's kind of terrifying. But realistically, I know that's not what Gemma meant. This is an idea worth jumping into for a bit. There's more to this, I reckon.
I think encountering a force, a higher power, the something bigger helps us manage, reminds us that we're designed to live in community and not on our own. So we're not islands, as I think it was John Milton said. We're not meant to be individual superheroes. We're not completely self-sufficient. We're absolutely designed as social animals, and believing in a higher power is, for me, kind of the logical extension of being in community with others, being in community with the natural world, being in community somehow with everything, with all time and space, and feeling like we're part of that whole. I think that gives potentially great meaning to life and great richness to life as well.
One of the things I reckon I've experienced and seen in the world around us, and it seems to be manifest more widely than just my own experience, is a sense of isolation and loneliness that we're seeing around. And we're seeing a huge increase in anxiety in young people. I remember someone during the time we had COVID said it was amazing. They sat down, they had chips and Netflix, and after a couple of weeks they realised that chips and Netflix isn't going to get them through COVID. What sustains us, I think, is community. And what ultimately sustains many communities is a sense that the community itself isn't everything, but is a community in response to something else. So I think there's this kind of chain of things going together. That to me is what ultimately a belief in a higher purpose or higher power might actually properly generate.
For me, it's not so much about believing in something bigger, but understanding what that sense of connectedness means. So for me, it's a sense of, I had these experiences as a young kid of being connected to the universe, awestruck when I went for walks in the bush, absolutely captivated by science and how awesome the world is. Then for me, it's the thing that was transformative was understanding that that sense of connection actually leads to a need to be responsible, for me to act in a way that actually enhances the system.
I think the difference, believing in a higher power, I think it gives you reason. Do you want to believe you're a coincidence? Do you want to believe that the only reason you are here is because some atoms collided, some cells collided, and you're just a coincidence? Or do you want to believe that you're here because there is a higher power that wanted you here, that loved you so much that they wanted you on this earth?
I think it makes a difference to people's lives, believing in a higher power, to ask people what is the higher power that they believe in. And often it helps to get a sense of what people have had experience with what they call a higher power, the experience that they've had with a higher power. And also, if they say they don't believe in that, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. Because often actually it's about people. I think it makes a huge difference believing in a higher power, depending on how that higher power has been put to people and who has benefited from that.
In a sense, it's actually a more important question than which higher power you believe in, is how you believe in whatever higher power. Because I think you can pretty much take any higher power or any object of worship, any object of adoration, and turn it into a kind of fantasy of my own completion and wholeness. You can do that with any God, right? You can do that. And that's a question of how you're believing in something. And I think that when it becomes a kind of fantasy of wholeness and completion, the act of believing requires that you kind of exclude or excise all those parts of yourself that are not whole, that are incomplete, and all those parts of the world and other people that are not whole, that are incomplete, and you're trying to kind of gather all into some, ultimately kind of stitched up fantasy of wholeness and completion. And I would say that's a problem. And that the difference that kind of makes in the world is it tends to be certain kinds of problematic differences that kind of exacerbate lines of exclusion. Whereas I think believing in something in a different way, like believing in a way that actually leads you into an embrace of incompletion, an embrace of contradiction, an embrace of what is not whole, and even what is disturbing and ugly about oneself and about others, that way of believing in something is actually more productive, is more conducive to kind of cutting against certain forms of violence. So when I think about this, I think of, again, I think Judaism in certain of its respects is exemplary here, because Judaism has all kinds of jokes that actually make fun of God. And I think that form of like believing in which you actually have room to like actually make fun of your own God, and realize that like your God can be made fun of and is subject to contradiction, that's a different way of believing, of holding belief, than of relating to an object of belief as something that brings kind of completion and wholeness.
There are times after I hear Peter that I think, I just need to sit down and have a cup of tea and think things through. There's way more to this, but I'm interested in the idea that how some people believe can lead to becoming more excluding. You know, putting a lot of energy into working out who's in and who's out. But once you embrace the idea that nobody's perfect, case in point, then spirituality can be much more about accepting each other and valuing the differences and humanness. That suits me a lot. Bring it home, Stuart.
When you do believe in something other than yourself, higher power, God, have that sort of sense of being spiritual or religious, then it does make you consider how your actions impact another. Believing that you are more than just yourself means that what I do today doesn't just matter for me, it matters for those around me. And that my impact, my footprint on this earth does actually carry some weight and responsibility. My favourite superhero is Spider-Man, and I love what Uncle Ben says to Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think we get that understanding through believing in that there is something other than just me as an individual doing what I want, as long as it doesn't impact anyone else.
Nice, right? I just think we haven't had enough Spider-Man mentioned so far. Because while Peter Parker does have great power and therefore great responsibility, each of us has a bit of power in the world and therefore some responsibility to do something with that. Something good, I reckon? What do you think?